ओम अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपः कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं सागरजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं श्रीकृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपदान् सहगण ललितां श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसदि गौरभक्त वृंदा। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Dear friends, today we are going to see if Bhagavad Gita is based on science or is it just mere sentiment or blind faith. Let's look at the definition of science to start with. So science is the study of the physical world. It is the study or knowledge of the physical and natural world and phenomena, especially by using systematic observation and experiment. And scientific epistemology can be defined as the systematic body of knowledge or a systematic organized body of knowledge about a particular object. Now let us look at the definition of faith. Faith means belief or trust. So belief in or devotion to or trust in somebody or something, especially without logical proof, is called as faith as per the Oxford Dictionary. Now let us define what is epistemology. Epistemology means a theory of knowledge, or it's a knowledge of knowledge. It is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of knowledge, in particular its foundation, scope and validity. So epistemology means it defines you the scope and validity of a particular branch of knowledge. It also looks at the foundation of that knowledge itself. Generally, the scientists throw stones at the religionists while they themselves live in a house made of glasses. So, science itself is based on some type of faith. For example, if I bring something under my microscope and study it through my microscope, indirectly I am believing in the validity of what the microscope does, and even just by using my eyes I am believing that what my eyes shows me is correct, right? So Prabhupada used to ask, what is the use of your eyes, because in darkness it cannot see. So we have very limited ways of knowing the truth, and therefore just using our limited perception of things doesn't prove or disprove anything. So the materialist operates on the belief that nature is all there is, right? So according to scientists, he just believes what he can see, what he can feel, what he can touch, what he can taste, and what he can feel with his sense of touch. So the materialistic scientist operates on the belief that nature is all there is. So already he is believing in some paradigm. So the modern scientific epistemology of the modern scientists, it is based on a belief system that what he can see is all there is. The word belief signifies something that is not scientifically proven. In fact, this founding proposition is not scientifically proven nor provable. So if you say that I just believe in what I see, then the foundation itself is pretty weak, because you cannot prove this statement or disprove this statement. So let us take a basic example, say gravity, right? We cannot see, touch, smell, taste, or touch gravity. Gravity is an invisible force associated with matter. Some say gravitons, which by the way have never been isolated, observed, or measured, but nonetheless are convenient placeholder for our ignorance. So even modern science cannot explain gravity. So they may come up with some concept called gravitons to analyze gravity, but they can neither prove nor disprove that there exist such items as gravitons. It is just a placeholder for our ignorance on this matter. No one knows why gravity is fond on some material, and some other materials like photons and lights, the gravity doesn't act on them. So you cannot say or prove why gravity acts on some materials and does not act on some other materials like photons or light particles and so forth. So we can see that even modern science is based on some axiomatic ideas or belief systems, and therefore it is wrong to say that science is superior to spiritual science or to faith based sciences. So there is the story of Newton, where he proved that the universes did not come about by chance, right? So there was another scientist who was of the opinion that the world came by chance or by Big Bang, and Newton happened to have a model of the planetary system in his house. And when the scientists came to his house and asked how or where you bought this beautiful model, Newton told him that it all came by chance. And then he explained it to the scientists that if this small model cannot come about by chance, how can you say that the whole universe came about by chance? Let us look at Vedic epistemology. So Vedic epistemology is a science about the science of Vedas, or it just talks about the foundational principles on which Veda is based. It also talks about the axiomatic truths that we believe in order to understand Vedas in a scientific way. So according to Vedas, there are 4 defects of the conditioned soul. One is that he has imperfect senses. The second is he can be deluded. Third is he can commit mistakes. And fourth is he may tend to cheat others in order to propagate his idea. So these are all the defects of a conditioned soul. So we have very imperfect senses. We can only see a certain frequency, we can only hear a certain frequency, we can only smell a certain things, we can only touch a certain things, and we can only taste a certain things. So we have imperfect senses. So the knowledge that we give out to the world using these imperfect senses will be imperfect. And therefore anybody who uses these imperfect senses to find the truth is bewildered himself, and he is actually cheating others, because no conditioned soul can understand the truth. According to the Vedas, there are 3 ways of gaining some knowledge. One is the empirical evidence, which is what the modern science is based on. So You mix hydrogen and oxygen and you see water, and therefore you can say that by scientific evidence I can say that hydrogen and oxygen mixes up and it forms water. And the second way of gaining knowledge is through inference. So when you look at, say, a mountain and on its peak, suppose you see some smoke, then you can infer that there is some fire there based on your previous experience with fire. So you have seen fire in your house and you know that fire causes some smoke, and when you see fire causing some smoke in your house, you can extrapolate that knowledge and say that when I see some smoke on top of the mountain, there must be some fire. And this is also imperfect because you do not know all the possible ways that smoke can be created. Therefore, if you just say that wherever there is smoke, there is fire, that is also wrong. So, for example, if you see some smoke, say in Jupiter or in Saturn, you do not know all the phenomena that happens out there, and therefore to say that there must be some fire that causes the smoke in Jupiter would be abruptly wrong. So all this boils down to the idea that the human senses and the thought processes are imperfect. So there was the time when people used to think that the earth was flat and not a round. And after some scientific investigations, they have changed their mind and now they say that the earth is round. We do not know what the scientists will conclude 20 centuries from now. Now we have some scientific evidence on certain things and we do not have scientific evidence on certain other things, and science, by the way it works in the modern world, is bound to change as we find more and more things. So in the modern world, in the modern context, we do not believe that there is such a thing as a soul, spirit soul. But maybe 20 centuries from now, the scientists may conclude that there could be something as a spirit soul. We do not know. So science in the modern context is not knowledge but merely a search for knowledge. Though it is propagated as being real knowledge, it is only a move towards knowledge, real knowledge. Therefore, we must not conclude that science in the modern context is knowledge itself. It could be knowledge or it could be ignorance. And it would remain so for eternity because that is how the modern scientific epistemology is structured. It is based on a belief system that what I see is what is true, and that belief system itself is pretty shaky. Now let us try to understand the science of the Bhagavad Gita. So we need to see if Bhagavad Gita is scientifically based or is it just a faith based poem. Right? It is not like a poem or it is not like a literature where somebody says if you do not believe in it then you will go to hell. So if somebody preaches like that, then you can say that it's not based on knowledge but it is based on sentiment. But Bhagavad Gita is not like that. So let us examine the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where the knowledge of the soul or knowledge about the soul is being explained. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the argument is placed like this. When I was a very small child, I had a different type of body. And as I grew up a little bit, I had a different type of body. And now I have a different type of body. And 20 years from now, I will have a very different type of body. And then when I have death, I will have a very, very different type of body. But the spirit soul, or the feeling that I am, that is constantly existing. According to modern science, every 10 years or 8 years, each and every cell in the body has been completely replaced. So even though the cells in the body has been completely replaced and there is not even one cell left which is more than 10 years old, I still believe that I am the same person. Why is that? Because I am not this body. I am different from this body. So this is a scientific proof that the Bhagavad Gita gives to show you that you are different from this body. Dehinasmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tata dehantara praptihi dhiras tatra namuhyati. So just like we remove our old shirt and pant and put on a new one, same way we relinquish the old body and move on to a new body. That is the knowledge of the soul that is being presented in Bhagavad Gita, and it is so scientifically presented. Right? What is the difference between a dead body and a living body? The dead body also has eyes and nose and tongue, and it also has the internal organs and so forth. But why we call a body as dead and why is another body called as living? What is that force that is inside of a body that keeps it living? So that is being described in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and that is the starting point of Vedic knowledge. And the modern science do not have any grasp on this knowledge that is present in the Vedic literature. According to the modern science, there is no such thing as a spirit soul. It is just by some combination of material things that we have all come about. So they cannot describe such things as feeling, willing, loving, hating, and things like that. Right? If we were just a bunch of chemicals, then why do we have such a thing as free will? For example, suppose I want to adjust my spectacles, I can will and I can do it or not do it. I have a free will. But how can material things, like for example, I cannot have this camera have a free will and decide to work or not work. So what is the difference between me and a camera, for example? Why do you think that I have a free will while a camera doesn't have a free will? What is the difference? So according to the Gita, the difference is the spirit soul. So these things are described in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita talks about how we must work and why we must work. Right? So we are all put into this world and we are all supposed to work and earn money and so forth. So what is the master plan? A person is born and he grows, he creates more children and then he dies. So what is the purpose of life? Is it just eating, mating, sleeping and defending, or is there anything more? What is the difference between a human being and an animal? So all these questions are being answered in the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita. What is the master plan that is being described in the third chapter? And in the fourth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there is a description of the super soul. So who created the whole universe? Who makes everything run? What is the reason he creates the whole universe? Is there any such thing as a spiritual world? And so forth. All those are described in the fourth chapter. And then he describes what is good and what is bad in the fourth chapter. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, describes these in the fourth chapter. And then he describes why he has to come into this material world to uplift the good and defeat the bad. So that is also described in the fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the description of working in knowledge is described. So there is the difference between merely working and working with a proper spiritual conception. That is described in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. In the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there is a description of meditation. So how one can perceive the Supreme Lord as the super soul within his heart. That is being described in a scientific way. So now we have so many disturbed ideas in our mind that we cannot feel the Supreme Lord. But in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, a process of meditation is being described where a yogi is able to calm his mind down and he is able to concentrate on the inner floor or inner depths of his mind, and he can find the super soul within himself. So that is being scientifically explained in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there is the science of transcendence. So for example, if you are an illiterate and you look at a motor car and its engine parts, you will just think of those as a bunch of iron blocks and nothing more. But if you were a trained mechanic and you look at the engine of a car, then you can very clearly see how the engine is working and so forth. So the substance is the same, but the vision of people differs based on their knowledge and understanding. In the same way, this world looks godless for an untrained eye. But in the 7th chapter, the description is given as to how to train oneself in such a way so that he can perceive God in each and every move. So, for example, for a trained person, when he drinks water, he can think of the taste of water as God. And for a trained person, when he smells a flower, he can think of it as a creation of God and so forth. So all those descriptions have been given in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita as to how to train oneself to perceive God in this material world. And in the 8th chapter of the Gita, there is a description about death. So here, the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, speaks about the signs of death. So there is this law of action and reaction. So there are some people who help others, who live by speaking the truth and so forth. And there are others who are liars and who are very mean to others. So they have done their actions. And the world will be incomplete if there are no reactions to those actions. Right? For example, when I go and hit myself against the wall, I see a pain. So the action of hitting against the wall is the action and the pain is the reaction. If I take bath in nice warm water, I will feel happy. I will feel warm. So the action is the action of pouring warm water on my body, and the reaction is that I feel happy and relaxed. So for every action there is some reaction. So in the same way we can infer that when we do good and bad actions, we have to suffer the reactions. So if we don't suffer the reactions in this life, then we have to suffer the reactions in the next life. So that is being described in the 8th chapter of the Gita. Yam yam vapis maran bhavam tejatante kalevaram tam tame vaiti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavitaha. So a person, whatever he remembers at the time of death, that becomes the thought process that defines what he will be in his next life. So that is being described in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the relationship between the spirit soul and the super soul is being described, and how the spirit soul must interact with the super soul is being described. And the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita speaks about how to see the Supreme all over the place. And the 12th chapter explains that God is personal. So there is some confusion about whether God is a person or imperfect or impersonal, and the 12th chapter answers those questions. And the 13th chapter of the Gita describes the difference between the soul, the spirit soul, and the body. And the 14th chapter describes the three modes of material nature. So we know about children born to the same parents. Why is that the first child behaves in a particular way and grows up in a particular way, while the second child behaves and grows up in a different way? Why that happens? And why is that some people are fond of hot food? Why is that some people are fond of spicy food? Why is that some people are interested in eating meat? Why is that some people are interested in eating fruits? Why is that some people are passionate about some things? Why is that some people are not passionate about some things? Why is there liking for something and disliking for something? So all the things, the mental phenomena that is being described in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is the modes of nature, like how the nature forces somebody to behave in a particular way, right? So for example, suppose somebody generally gets angry or is bad tempered, then we say that that is his nature. So the 14th chapter describes why that is his nature. And the 15th chapter describes how to attain liberation from the sufferings that we have in the material world. And it also describes whether there is suffering in the material world or is it just a mental concoction. So many people would say there is no suffering in the material world. But if you read Gita carefully, you will understand that Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Dosha Anudarshanam. Birth is painful, death is painful, old age is painful, disease is painful. So in between the birth, death, old age and disease and hard work, there is a little bit of time that we call as enjoyment, but that is very flickery and very, very tiny when we look at the whole life. So the 15th chapter proves that there is more suffering in the material world than happiness. And the 16th chapter describes the good and bad tendencies in the human being and what must be encouraged and what must be discouraged and so forth. So selfishness is to be discouraged, anger is to be discouraged, greed is to be discouraged, and selflessness is to be encouraged. And those type of tendencies, they're all described in the 16th chapter. The 17th chapter again gives a more detailed view about the modes of nature, and the 18th chapter talks about conclusion and renunciation. So in this way, the Bhagavad Gita is a very, very scientific presentation on the human mind, and it is also a helpful tool that can help humanity to go from the unhappy frame of mind to the happy frame of mind. So for example, suppose somebody has a huge loss, or suppose somebody has a very debilitating disease, can he still be happy? So all these questions are being answered in the Bhagavad Gita. And also, what is the aim of life? That is being described in the Bhagavad Gita. And how to make oneself happy and how to proceed towards eternal happiness. All these things are being described in the Bhagavad Gita in a very scientific way. Therefore, we can safely conclude that Bhagavad Gita is a book of psychology, and it is to be valued as much or even more than the modern scientific achievements of humanity. Thank you.